What if I told you that just a few powerful lessons could completely change the direction of your life? Not hundreds, not thousands, just 20 life lessons, simple, timeless truths that once understood can improve your life forever. Most people go through life learning things the hard way, through pain, regret, and missed opportunities. But you don't have to. In today's audiobook, you'll discover 20 powerful lessons about success, relationships, mindset, and self-growth. Lessons that can save you years of struggle and help you become a stronger, wiser, and more fulfilled person. So make sure you stay with me until the end, because one of these lessons might be exactly what you need to hear right now. And if you enjoy content like this, deep, life-changing ideas that actually make a difference, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Now, take a deep breath, relax your mind, and let's begin. Lesson 1. Your mind is either your greatest ally or your most dangerous enemy. There is a war happening inside you right now. It has been happening since the moment you were old enough to think. It is not a war between you and the world outside. It is not a war between you and other people. It is a war between two versions of yourself, the version that wants to grow and the version that wants to stay comfortable. The mind is the most powerful instrument ever created in the known universe. In a few pounds of soft tissue nestled inside your skull lives the capacity to conceive of entire civilizations, to solve problems that have baffled generations, to feel emotions so profound they rewrite the entire meaning of existence. And yet, for the vast majority of people alive on this planet, this instrument is running on a default setting, set not by conscious intention, but by fear, habit, and the accumulated weight of other people's opinions. The first and most foundational lesson you must absorb, not merely understand, but internalize into the deepest layer of your being, is this: your mind is not automatically your friend. Left unchecked, left unexamined, it will lie to you. It will catastrophize. It will replay your failures on an endless loop. It will whisper that you are not enough, that it is too late, that other people are more capable, more deserving, more ready than you will ever be. The ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who was born a slave and died one of the most respected thinkers in the Roman world, understood this truth 2,000 years ago. He wrote, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. The world does not cause your suffering. Your interpretation of the world causes your suffering." This distinction is not a philosophical footnote. It is the entire game. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what the ancient philosophers intuited. The human brain, by evolutionary design, has a negativity bias, a hardwired tendency to give more weight, more attention, and more emotional energy to threats, failures, and losses than to successes, opportunities, and gains. This was useful when our ancestors needed to remember where the predators lived. It is far less useful when you are trying to build a meaningful life in the 21st century. The brain you were born with is optimized for survival. The brain you need to build the life you want must be optimized for something far more demanding: intentional living. So how do you do it? How do you take this instrument, this default, fear-wired, survival-obsessed organ, and reshape it into something that serves your highest aspirations rather than your most primal anxieties? You begin with awareness. Not passive awareness, the kind that notices things and then moves on, but the deep, unflinching, almost uncomfortable awareness of a surgeon examining a wound. You start paying attention to what your mind is doing when no one is watching. What thoughts arise when you are alone in the early morning? What stories do you tell yourself about why you haven't started, why you failed, why it isn't your fault, why the time isn't right? What beliefs have you inherited from your parents, your culture, your early experiences that you have never once questioned? The philosopher and psychologist William James, who is considered the father of American psychology, made a statement that should be carved above every door. The greatest revolution of our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. This is not motivational rhetoric. This is a clinical observation about the nature of human transformation. You must begin treating your mind the way a skilled craftsman treats a tool. You oil it, you sharpen it, you use it deliberately, with purpose, and you put it down when you don't need it. You stop letting it run in the background like a program that was never designed to stop running. Here is a practice that will begin to shift everything. Every evening, before you sleep, ask yourself 3 questions. First, what did I believe today that may not be true? Second, what story did I tell myself that kept me small? Third, what would I think, feel, and do differently if I genuinely believed I was capable of more? These questions are not comfortable. They are not supposed to be. Comfort, as you will come to understand through these lessons, is frequently the enemy of growth. Your mind, once trained, once disciplined, once directed with intention, becomes something extraordinary. It becomes the engine of a life that most people only dream about. But that training does not happen by accident. It happens by choice. It happens when you decide, with the full weight of your conviction, that you will no longer allow your default programming to determine your destiny. Make that decision now, not tomorrow, not when things are better or calmer or more convenient. Right now, in this moment, declare that your mind belongs to you and that you will govern it accordingly. Lesson 2. The life you have is the direct result of the standards you accept. Look at your life carefully. Look at your relationships, your finances, your health, your career, your daily habits, the quality of your thoughts, the depth of your joy. Everything you see, every single element of your current existence, is the precise and accurate expression of what you have been willing to accept. This is a hard truth. It is perhaps the hardest truth in this entire audiobook, and it is the truth that most people will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid. We are magnificent storytellers when it comes to explaining why our lives are not what we want them to be. The economy is against us. Our family did not support us. We were born in the wrong place, at the wrong time, to the wrong people. Our boss does not recognize our talent. Society is unfair. The system is rigged. Some of these stories contain genuine elements of truth. Systemic injustice is real. Privilege is real. Not everyone starts from the same place. These are facts that deserve acknowledgement. But here is what is equally true, equally documented, equally verifiable across thousands of biographies, psychological studies, and the testimony of people who have built extraordinary lives from nothing. Within whatever circumstances you were given, there was always a standard you set for yourself. And that standard, not your circumstances, is the primary determinant of where you are right now. Tony Robbins, who has spent 4 decades studying what separates people who achieve extraordinary results from those who achieve ordinary ones, has said that the quality of your life is in direct proportion to the quality of the standards you hold for yourself. Not your talent, not your luck, not your connections, your standards. Standards are not wishes. A wish is something you hope will happen without your having to change. A standard is something you absolutely refuse to live below. When something falls below your standard, it creates an almost physical discomfort, a kind of moral restlessness that refuses to let you settle. Most people have very few genuine standards. They have preferences, they have vague desires, they have things they would like to have, relationships they would like to improve, bodies they would like to inhabit. But a preference folds the moment life applies pressure. A standard does not. Consider what happens when a person makes the decision, a true, irreversible decision, that they will never again go to sleep having eaten poorly, or that they will never speak to themselves with contempt, or that they will never allow a week to pass without genuine connection with the people they love. What happens is not magic. What happens is recalibration. The entire system of their behavior begins to orient around the new standard, because the standard is now the floor, not the ceiling. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who governed the most powerful empire in the known world while simultaneously writing what many consider the greatest personal journal in human history, held himself to standards so exacting that they fill us with something close to awe 2,000 years later. He wrote, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." That was not poetry. That was the governing principle of his daily life. So what are your standards? Not what do you wish for? What do you refuse to accept? What behaviors in yourself will you no longer tolerate? What quality of relationship will you no longer settle for? What version of your physical health, your financial life, your creative output, your spiritual depth, what version of all of these things is simply categorically below what you are willing to accept? Begin here. Sit down and write the standards, not the goals, but the standards. Goals are outcomes. Standards are behaviors. Goals say, I want to lose 30 pounds. Standards say, I will not spend another evening consuming food that treats my body as a garbage receptacle. Goals say, I want to be financially independent. Standards say, I will not spend money today that makes me less free tomorrow. The moment you raise your standards, genuinely, not performatively, your entire life begins to reorganize itself around the new baseline. Not because the universe rewards intention, but because your behavior changes, and behavior is causative. When you behave differently, you get different results. It is not more complicated than that. Raise your standards, then hold them even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching, because the person who is always watching, the one whose judgment matters most, is you. Lesson 3. Discipline is the bridge between who you are and who you intend to become. Somewhere between where you are and where you want to be, there is a bridge. It is not made of luck. It is not made of talent, though talent helps. It is not made of the right circumstances appearing at the right time, though that can accelerate things. The bridge is made of one thing and one thing alone: discipline. Discipline is the most misunderstood word in the vocabulary of personal development. Most people hear the word and think of punishment, of denial, of the grim business of forcing yourself to do things you do not want to do. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of what discipline actually is. Discipline, at its most essential, is the practice of honoring your future self in the present moment. It is the decision, made in real time, to act in alignment with your long-term values rather than your short-term impulses. It is choosing the person you are becoming over the comfort of the person you currently are. When you wake up 40 minutes earlier to exercise, you are not punishing yourself. You are honoring the version of you that wants to be healthy and energetic. When you put down the phone and pick up the book, you are not depriving yourself of entertainment. You are honoring the version of you that wants to be knowledgeable and thoughtful. When you have the difficult conversation you have been avoiding, you are not creating conflict. You are honoring the version of you that wants relationships built on truth rather than convenience. Jocko Willink, the retired Navy SEAL officer and leadership consultant, has popularized the phrase, "Discipline equals freedom." This is not a paradox. It is a profound and accurate description of the relationship between constraint and liberation. The person who is disciplined about their finances is free from the anxiety of debt. The person who is disciplined about their health is free from the fear of physical decline. The person who is disciplined about their time is free from the tyranny of other people's urgency. Freedom is not the absence of discipline. Freedom is the reward that discipline delivers. The research on discipline is unambiguous. A landmark study conducted over decades at Stanford University, originally known as the marshmallow experiment, demonstrated that children who could delay gratification, who could resist the impulse to eat one marshmallow in exchange for receiving two later, grew up to have better health outcomes, higher academic achievement, stronger social relationships, and greater financial stability than those who could not. The ability to delay gratification is one of the most powerful predictors of long-term success ever identified by science. But here is what most people do not know about discipline. It is not a fixed trait. You are not born with it or without it. Discipline is a skill, and like all skills, it is developed through practice. Every time you choose the harder right over the easier wrong, you are strengthening the neural pathways that make future discipline easier. Every time you surrender to impulse without reflection, you are reinforcing the pathways that make discipline harder. This means that where you are today, disciplined or undisciplined, consistent or erratic, directed or scattered, is not where you have to stay. The brain is plastic. Your character is malleable. You can begin right now, in this moment, to build the neural architecture of a disciplined mind. Start small. This is critical. The biggest mistake people make when attempting to become more disciplined is choosing changes so large, so dramatic, so demanding that they inevitably collapse under the weight of their own ambition. The discipline muscle, like any other muscle, must be trained progressively. You do not walk into a gym on day one and attempt to lift the heaviest weight in the room. You begin with what you can handle, and you add weight as your capacity grows. Choose one area of your life, just one, and commit to a single, non-negotiable daily practice for 30 days. Make it small enough to be almost laughably achievable. Wake up 10 minutes earlier. Drink 1 extra glass of water. Write 3 sentences in a journal. Read 5 pages of a meaningful book. Do 1 set of 10 push-ups. The specific practice matters far less than the act of keeping the commitment. Because what you are training is not the behavior itself. You are training the identity. You are proving to yourself through daily action that you are someone who does what they say they will do. And once that identity is established, once you genuinely believe that you are a person of discipline, the behaviors follow naturally, because they are now expressions of who you are rather than obligations imposed from outside. This is the bridge. Every plank is a day of kept commitment. Every kept commitment is a step closer to the person you are becoming. Walk the bridge, plank by plank, day by day. The other side is where everything you want is waiting. Lesson 4. Most of your suffering is optional. Sit with that statement for a moment before you react to it. Most of your suffering is optional. Not all of it. Genuine pain, grief, loss, and hardship are real, and no philosophical framework can or should dismiss them. But the vast majority of the mental anguish that the average person carries through their daily life, the anxiety, the resentment, the rumination, the bitterness, the low-grade dread that colors entire weeks and months, most of that is a construction of the mind, not an objective reality. The Stoics called this distinction the difference between things that are up to us and things that are not up to us. Epictetus devoted the first sentence of his Enchiridion, his handbook for living, to this distinction. Some things are in our control and others not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, reputation, command, and, in one word, whatever are not our own actions. This is not fatalism. This is not an instruction to be passive in the face of injustice or to accept circumstances that should be changed. This is a surgical tool for identifying where your energy is well spent and where it is being hemorrhaged into the void of things you cannot control. Think about the last time you were genuinely, deeply miserable. Not about something that just happened, but about something that was happening in your mind. You were reliving a conversation that went wrong. You were dreading an event that had not yet occurred. You were comparing your life to someone else's and finding yourself wanting. You were worrying about what people thought of you, or might think of you, or had once thought of you. You were angry about something you could not change, nursing a grievance that served no function except to poison the present moment. None of that suffering was mandatory. All of it was, in the exact language of the Stoics, a matter of opinion. Your interpretation, your story, your mental frame applied to events that had their own objective reality, separate and distinct from the narrative you constructed around them. The psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to found an entire school of psychology called logotherapy, wrote perhaps the most profound statement about human freedom ever committed to paper. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Frankl experienced this not as a philosophical abstraction, but as a living truth, tested in the most extreme conditions imaginable. He discovered that even in circumstances of total external deprivation, when everything had been stripped away, when freedom, family, and dignity had all been taken, the inner life remained sovereign. The Nazis could control where he went, what he ate, whether he lived or died. They could not control what he chose to think, or what meaning he assigned to his experience. If that is true, and it is, then you, in your daily life, with your comparatively manageable frustrations and disappointments, have far more capacity to choose your inner experience than you currently exercise. This does not mean that you will not feel pain. Pain is not optional. Pain is the appropriate human response to loss, failure, and grief, and any attempt to eliminate it entirely is both futile and harmful. What is optional is the prolonging of pain beyond its natural duration, the layering of unnecessary narratives on top of real suffering, and the spending of today's energy on yesterday's wounds or tomorrow's fears. The practice of distinguishing optional suffering from necessary pain begins with a simple question, asked in real time, in the midst of distress. Is this happening to me, or is this happening in my mind? When a difficult emotion arises, trace it back to its source. Is there something actually occurring right now that requires my attention and response? Or am I adding interpretive layers, stories, fears, resentments, comparisons, to an experience that, in its raw form, might be far more manageable than the story I am telling about it? This is one of the most liberating practices available to a human being. The day you realize that most of your suffering is self-generated is the day you reclaim an extraordinary degree of sovereignty over your own inner life. You stop being a passive recipient of whatever the world sends your way and become an active architect of your experience. The world will always send difficulty, that is guaranteed. What is not guaranteed is how much additional suffering you pile on top of it. Choose deliberately, choose wisely, and choose often to let go of the optional pain, because the space it vacates can be filled with something infinitely more valuable: presence, clarity, and peace. Lesson 5. Your environment is shaping you whether you intend it to or not. You are not as self-determining as you believe. This is not an insult. It is one of the most important findings of modern behavioral science, and understanding it can fundamentally alter how you approach the project of becoming who you want to be. The human being is an environmental creature. We are shaped, profoundly, continuously, often invisibly, by the spaces we inhabit, the people we spend time with, the media we consume, the conversations we participate in, and the cultural norms we are surrounded by. This shaping does not wait for our permission. It does not announce itself. It operates below the threshold of conscious awareness, restructuring our defaults, our expectations, our sense of what is normal, and our sense of what is possible. James Clear, in his landmark work on habits, makes a point that deserves to be repeated slowly. Environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. The word invisible is the key. We think we are making deliberate choices. We think we are exercising will and intention, and sometimes we are. But far more often, we are simply doing what our environment makes easy. If there is a bowl of fruit on your kitchen counter, you will eat more fruit. If there is a television in your bedroom, you will sleep worse. If your phone is within arm's reach, you will check it dozens of times a day without ever consciously deciding to. If you work in an open-plan office surrounded by distracted people, you will be distracted. If your closest friends spend their weekends drinking and complaining, you will find it extremely difficult to spend yours reading and creating. The environment wins, not because you are weak, but because the environment is relentless. This is not cause for despair. It is cause for radical intentionality about the environments you create and inhabit. The great architect Frank Lloyd Wright believed that the spaces we live in shape the people we become. He was right in ways that went far beyond architecture. Your environment is not background. It is not neutral. It is active, influential, and operating on you constantly. So the question is not simply, what do I want to achieve? The question is, what environment will make the person I want to become the path of least resistance? Design your physical space to support your goals. If you want to write, create a space dedicated to writing, a desk cleared of clutter, stocked with what you need, free from the distraction of screens. If you want to exercise, lay out your workout clothes the night before, place your shoes by the door, remove the barrier between intention and action. If you want to eat well, restructure your kitchen so that healthy food is the first thing you see and the easiest thing to reach. But the most powerful environmental factor in most people's lives is not their physical space. It is their social environment. The people around you are constantly communicating through their behavior, their attitudes, and their expectations what is normal, what is possible, and what is acceptable. You absorb these communications mostly without knowing it. Jim Rohn, one of the great business philosophers of the 20th century, made an observation that has been cited so many times it has become almost a cliché. But it has become a cliché precisely because it is so accurate. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. This is not merely a figure of speech. Research in social psychology confirms that human beings mirror the behavior, emotional states, habits, and even the aspirations of those around them. When you spend time with people who read, you read more. When you spend time with people who exercise, you exercise more. When you spend time with people who think ambitiously, your own thinking expands. The inverse is equally true and equally powerful. When you spend time with people who are cynical, you become more cynical. When you spend time with people who complain chronically, your capacity for gratitude diminishes. When you spend time with people who have accepted mediocrity as inevitable, your appetite for excellence quietly atrophies. This does not mean you should abandon people who are struggling or cut off everyone who does not meet some arbitrary standard of success. What it means is that you must be extraordinarily conscious about who gets the most significant real estate in your life, who you seek out, whose opinion you weight, whose example you follow, and in whose presence you do your most important thinking. Audit your environment today, not someday, today. Look at your physical space, your media consumption, your social circle, and the conversations you regularly participate in. Ask yourself, with ruthless honesty, does this environment support the person I am trying to become, or does it make that person harder to be? Then change what you can, remove what hinders, add what helps. And understand that the most important gift you can give your future self is an environment that makes excellence not the exception, but the default. Lesson 6. Pain is a teacher, and avoidance is its opposite. Every significant thing you have ever learned, you learned because something hurt. This is not a poetic exaggeration, it is a neurological fact. The brain encodes lessons most deeply when they are accompanied by strong emotional experiences, and among the strongest emotional experiences available to a human being is pain. Physical pain, emotional pain, the pain of failure, the pain of loss, the pain of being wrong about something you held to be true. Pain is not the enemy of growth. The avoidance of pain is the enemy of growth. Modern culture has developed an almost pathological relationship with discomfort. We live in an age of unprecedented convenience, where the friction of almost every experience has been engineered away. Food arrives without cooking, entertainment requires no effort, connection happens without presence, information is available without the labor of seeking it, and the cumulative effect of all this friction removal is a population that is, in many ways, less equipped than any previous generation to sit with difficulty and learn from it. When something hurts, the culturally sanctioned response is to make it stop as quickly as possible. Take the painkiller, distract yourself, numb it, scroll past it, drink through it, avoid the conversation. Skip the session, quit before it becomes too hard. And in the short term, these strategies work. The pain stops, or at least recedes, but the lesson it carried goes unlearned. The growth it could have catalyzed does not happen, and you return to the same circumstances that generated the pain, slightly more practiced in avoidance and slightly less capable of endurance. The ancient Stoics had a practice they called the premeditation of adversity, deliberately imagining the worst-case scenarios of their lives, not to generate fear, but to prepare themselves for difficulty and to desensitize themselves to the discomfort of imagining it. Marcus Aurelius regularly reminded himself that everything he loved was temporary, that those around him would die, that his own body would fail, not because he was a pessimist, but because he understood that the anticipation of loss is itself a form of painful growth, and the person who has rehearsed adversity is better equipped to bear it when it comes. Modern psychology has a parallel concept called stress inoculation, the deliberate graduated exposure to stressors in order to build resilience. It is the psychological equivalent of a vaccine. Small doses of the thing that frightens you, in controlled conditions, build your capacity to withstand larger doses when they arrive uninvited. The question to ask of every painful experience is not, how do I make this stop? The question is, what is this teaching me? When a relationship ends and the grief is overwhelming, the lesson might be about what you truly value in connection, or about patterns in your own behavior that contributed to the dissolution, or about the degree to which you have allowed your sense of self to depend on another person's presence. When a business fails, the lesson is not that you should stop trying. The lesson is usually specific, technical, and utterly invaluable to the next attempt. When your body breaks down, the lesson is often about the way you have been treating it, the sleep you have been skipping, the food you have been eating, the stress you have been accumulating without discharge. None of these lessons are available to the person who runs from the pain. They are only available to the person who stays in the room with the difficulty long enough to hear what it has to say. There is a beautiful concept in the world of athletics called the growth zone. Between comfort and crisis, there is a territory that is uncomfortable enough to challenge you, but safe enough to develop you. This is where growth happens. This is the zone that elite performers deliberately seek out, again and again, because they have learned that the brief discomfort of operating at the edge of their capacity is the price of expanded capacity. Seek your growth zone, not the comfortable zone where nothing new is demanded of you, not the panic zone where the challenge is so overwhelming that paralysis sets in. Find the place that is just past where you are comfortable and spend time there daily. Pain is not weakness leaving the body. That saying, while motivating, is incomplete. Pain is more than that. Pain is information leaving the universe and entering your awareness. Receive it, decode it, act on it, and you will find that what once felt like punishment is actually the most honest and generous teacher you have ever had. Lesson 7. The quality of your relationships determines the quality of your life. When researchers at Harvard University set out to conduct the longest-running study of adult life ever undertaken, a study that began in 1938 and has now followed participants and their descendants for nearly 90 years, they expected to find that factors like wealth, intelligence, fame, or professional achievement would be the primary predictors of a long, healthy, happy life. What they found instead was both simpler and more profound than anything they had hypothesized. The single greatest predictor of well-being in old age, outranking social class, IQ, genetics, and almost every other variable, was the quality of the person's relationships. Not the quantity, the quality. People who had warm, trusting, genuinely intimate connections with others lived longer, stayed healthier, reported greater happiness, and experienced significantly slower cognitive decline than those who were isolated or whose relationships were characterized by conflict, distrust, or superficiality. Robert Waldinger, the current director of the Harvard Study of Adult Development, summarized its central finding in a TED Talk that has been viewed more than 40 million times. Good relationships keep us happier and healthier. Period. This is the most well-supported finding in the science of human flourishing, and it is also, paradoxically, the finding that modern culture seems most determined to ignore. We live in an era of unprecedented connectivity and unprecedented loneliness. The average person has hundreds of digital connections and a shrinking number of people they can call in a genuine crisis. We spend hours each day in the performance of relationships, posting, liking, sharing, commenting, and ever fewer hours in the actual experience of them, sitting across from another person, fully present, genuinely seen and seeing. The 7th lesson is this: you must treat your relationships as you would treat any other important investment, with attention, intention, effort, and time. Not the leftover time, not the time that remains after everything else has been attended to. The good time, the first time, the time when you are present and energized and capable of real connection. What does this look like in practice? It looks like putting the phone away when you are with another person, not on the table, not face down, but out of reach and out of sight. Research conducted at the University of Texas at Austin found that the mere presence of a smartphone on a table, even when turned face down and silent, significantly reduced the quality of conversation and the degree to which participants felt connected to each other. The device does not even need to be in use to diminish the relationship. Its presence alone communicates, "There is somewhere more important I could be." It looks like asking better questions, not "How are you?" which is not a question but a greeting, but genuine, curious, attentive inquiry into the life and inner experience of another person. How are you actually? What has been weighing on you lately? What are you genuinely excited about? When did you last feel completely alive? These questions, asked with real interest and received with real attention, are the raw material of deep connection. It looks like being willing to be seen. Relationships cannot be deep if they are not honest, and honesty requires vulnerability, the willingness to show another person not only the polished, curated, Instagram-worthy version of your life, but the version that is afraid, confused, struggling, uncertain, and imperfect. The researcher, Brené Brown, has demonstrated through years of work that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the birthplace of connection, creativity, and belonging. The armor you wear to protect yourself from judgment is the same armor that keeps love out. It looks like showing up for the people you love, not just on the significant occasions, but in the ordinary, unremarkable moments. The Tuesday evening phone call, the unexpected note, the simple act of remembering something they mentioned and asking about it later. These small gestures, repeated over time, are what relationships are actually made of, not the grand declarations, the daily deposits. And it looks like having the hard conversations. Every relationship of any depth will encounter moments of friction, misunderstanding, and conflict. The people who avoid these conversations in the name of keeping the peace are not keeping the peace. They are allowing resentment to accumulate in the silence until the weight of what has been unsaid becomes heavier than the relationship can bear. Honest, respectful, courageous conversation is not a threat to a good relationship. It is how a good relationship remains good. Your relationships are your life. Not a part of your life, your life. Tend them accordingly. Lesson 8. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Self-care is not selfishness. There is a particular brand of martyrdom that is widely celebrated in contemporary culture. It is the martyrdom of the person who sleeps 4 hours a night and wears their exhaustion as a badge of honor. The person who skips meals, abandons hobbies, neglects friendships, and surrenders every dimension of personal life to the demands of productivity, service, or ambition. In certain circles, this martyrdom is not merely accepted, it is venerated. You are praised for how much you sacrifice. You are admired for how little you need. You are held up as a model of dedication precisely because you have hollowed yourself out in service of something external. And then one day, you collapse. Not metaphorically, literally. Your body or your mind or both reach a point where they simply cannot continue at the pace you have demanded of them, and you are forced to stop. Not by choice, but by the catastrophic failure of the very instrument you have been exploiting. Or, more commonly, you do not dramatically collapse. You just slowly diminish. The creativity dries up. The warmth drains away. The patience you once had for the people you love disappears. The enthusiasm that once made you excellent at what you do becomes flat, performative, mechanical. You are present in all the required places and absent from all of them simultaneously. This is burnout. Not an event, but a gradual process of depletion that is the inevitable result of sustained output without adequate replenishment. The 8th lesson is one that should require no argument, and yet seems to require constant repetition in a culture that conflates busyness with value. You must take care of yourself, not as a luxury, not as an indulgence, not as something you will do when the work is done, but as a fundamental, non-negotiable prerequisite for being any good to anyone, including yourself. The analogy of the oxygen mask on an airplane is familiar, but remains precisely accurate. In the event of a sudden loss of cabin pressure, you are instructed to put on your own oxygen mask before assisting others. This is not a suggestion to be selfish, it is an acknowledgement of a physical fact. An unconscious person cannot help anyone. A person gasping for air cannot give it away. A depleted person cannot sustain what they are asked to sustain. Sleep is the most underrated performance-enhancing tool available to a human being. The neuroscientist Matthew Walker, who has spent his career studying the function and importance of sleep, describes it as the single most effective thing we can do to reset our brain and body health each day. Not diet, not exercise, not meditation, though all of these matter. Sleep. The research is unambiguous. People who sleep less than 7 hours per night on a regular basis demonstrate impaired cognitive function, compromised immune systems, elevated cortisol levels, reduced emotional regulation, increased risk of anxiety and depression, and significantly shorter life expectancy than those who sleep adequately. No amount of caffeine compensates for chronic sleep deprivation. No discipline or willpower substitutes for it. The debt is real, and it collects interest. Beyond sleep, self-care means maintaining the physical body with the same intentionality you would bring to maintaining any important piece of machinery. Food is not entertainment, it is fuel. The question to ask about what you eat is not merely, does this taste good, but does this enable me to be who I need to be? Movement is not optional. The human body was designed over hundreds of thousands of years for physical activity, and it does not function well without it. Not because exercise is punishment, but because it is maintenance, the basic upkeep of an instrument that was never designed to be sedentary. Self-care also means attending to your inner life, the emotional, psychological, and spiritual dimensions of your experience that do not show up on any productivity metric, but are in fact the source of everything that makes you worth spending time with. This means having quiet. It means having solitude. It means having experiences that fill you up. Beauty, art, music, nature, laughter, genuine play, the kind of rest that is not merely the absence of work, but the active replenishment of the self. You are not a machine. You are a human being with finite reserves of attention, energy, creativity, patience, and care. Those reserves are not infinite. They must be refilled. And the refilling is not a reward for having worked hard enough. It is a condition of being able to work at all, and of showing up for the people and the purposes that matter most to you. Take care of yourself. Do it without guilt. Do it without apology. Do it with the understanding that a full cup is the only cup that can give anything to anyone else. Lesson 9. Gratitude is not a feeling. It is a practice and a discipline. Let us begin with what gratitude is not. Gratitude is not the shallow positivity of someone who has been told to look on the bright side. It is not the reflexive, "I'm so blessed," that functions as social performance rather than genuine inner orientation. It is not the denial of difficulty, the minimization of suffering, or the pretense that everything is fine when it is not. Gratitude, in its true form, is one of the most cognitively sophisticated and emotionally powerful states available to a human being. It is the deliberate, effortful recognition of the good that exists within the complicated totality of your actual life. A recognition that requires the discipline to look clearly at reality, to find what is genuinely worthy of appreciation, and to remain aware of it even when the mind's natural gravitational pull is toward what is wrong, missing, or threatened. The science of gratitude is among the most robust bodies of research in positive psychology. Robert Emmons, widely considered the world's leading scientific expert on gratitude, has conducted studies showing that people who regularly practice gratitude, who deliberately and consistently identify and reflect on what they are thankful for, report significantly higher levels of positive emotion, greater life satisfaction, stronger relationships, more generosity toward others, improved physical health, and better sleep quality. The effects are not marginal. They are substantial and replicable across different populations and contexts. More remarkably, gratitude has been shown to interrupt the negativity bias of the brain. Recall that the human brain is hardwired to attend more strongly to threats and losses than to safety and gains. Gratitude practice is, in a very real neurological sense, a form of counter-training, the deliberate exercise of the mind's capacity to notice and value what is present and working, as a counterweight to its default tendency to fixate on what is absent and broken. But gratitude does not happen automatically for most people. This is the crucial point that separates the understanding of gratitude from the practice of it. You can know intellectually that you have much to be grateful for. You can acknowledge, in the abstract, that your life contains real goods. And yet, without a disciplined practice, this knowledge remains abstract, pleasant in theory, inoperative in the actual texture of daily experience. The practice of gratitude requires structure, it requires regularity, and it requires specificity, which is perhaps its most important and most underappreciated element.
Vague gratitude. I'm grateful for my family, or I'm thankful for my health, has some benefit, but its power is limited by its abstraction. The brain habituates quickly to generalities. What sustains and deepens the neurological impact of gratitude practice is the particular, the concrete, the sensory. I am grateful for the sound of my child's laughter this morning. I am grateful for the conversation I had with my friend yesterday when they said exactly what I needed to hear. I am grateful for the cup of coffee sitting before me right now, for the warmth of it in my hands, and the way it marks the beginning of a day that is mine. I am grateful against all odds for this specific, improbable, temporary, unrepeatable life. Specificity anchors gratitude in reality. It prevents it from becoming a mental performance and makes it a genuine act of attention to the actual goods of an actual life. There is also a dimension of gratitude that is more demanding and perhaps more transformative than the appreciation of pleasant things. It is the gratitude for difficulty. Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself in his private journal, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, and do so with all your heart." The Stoics did not merely tolerate adversity, they found in it a reason for gratitude, because adversity develops character, tests virtue, and offers opportunities for growth that prosperity cannot provide. This is not masochism, it is the recognition, earned through mature experience, that some of the greatest gifts a life can offer come wrapped in the most unwelcome packaging. The illness that forced you to slow down and reevaluate, the failure that redirected you toward a better path, the loss that stripped away everything superficial and left you with what was real. These things are terrible when they happen, and they also, in time, tend to be among the most profoundly shaping experiences a person can have. Practice gratitude, not as a mood but as a discipline. Every morning before the day claims your attention, find 3 specific things to be genuinely grateful for. Not because your life is perfect, not because everything is going well, but because the practice of looking for what is good, exercised consistently, reshapes the entire lens through which you experience your existence. The world you see is not separate from the attention you bring to it. Train your attention toward gratitude, and you will find that the world you inhabit becomes, in a real and measurable way, better. Not because circumstances changed, but because you did. Lesson 10. Failure is information, not identity. You have failed. You will fail again. And the degree to which your life becomes what you want it to be depends almost entirely on how you interpret those failures when they occur. This is the lesson that has been taught in one form or another by virtually every person who has built anything of lasting significance. Edison, who failed over 1,000 times before producing a working light bulb, reframed each failed experiment as the discovery of a way that would not work. Information, not defeat. Jordan, who was cut from his high school basketball team, returned to practice with the precise knowledge of what he needed to improve. Rowling, who was rejected by 12 publishers before a small London press agreed to take a chance on the first Harry Potter manuscript, continued writing because she understood that rejection is an opinion, not a verdict. What distinguishes these people from those who gave up is not talent. Talent is common. What distinguishes them is how they coded failure in their minds. For them, failure was data. It was feedback. It was the specific, targeted information that told them exactly where the gap existed between where they were and where they needed to be. It was, paradoxically, a form of progress, because only by attempting and failing do you learn what adjustments are required. The psychological concept that underlies this distinction is what Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck calls the growth mindset. In her landmark research,
Dweck discovered that people fundamentally differ in how they conceive of the relationship between effort, ability, and outcome. Those with a fixed mindset believe that talent and intelligence are static. Either you have them or you don't. In this framework, failure is evidence that you don't have what it takes, and the appropriate response is to avoid future situations where failure might occur. Those with a growth mindset believe that ability is developed through effort, that the brain and its capacities are malleable, that challenges are opportunities, and that failure is the curriculum of mastery. The difference in outcome between these two orientations is enormous. Dweck's research, replicated across cultures and age groups, consistently shows that people with growth mindsets achieve more, recover from setbacks more effectively, take on greater challenges, and report higher levels of meaning and engagement with their work than those with fixed mindsets. But here is what makes this finding truly extraordinary. The growth mindset can be cultivated. It is not a personality trait you either have or don't. It is a habit of interpretation, a way of framing experience that can be practiced, strengthened, and made into a default response. The language you use about failure is crucial. When something goes wrong and you say, "I am a failure," you have committed a category error of profound significance. You have taken a temporary event and used it to define a permanent identity. When instead you say, "I failed at this specific thing in this specific context," you have accurately described an experience without weaponizing it against your sense of self. The first statement closes doors. The second one opens them. Every person who has ever achieved anything meaningful in a domain of genuine difficulty has a long, specific, and often painful history of failure. This is not a coincidence. It is a prerequisite. You cannot develop mastery without encountering the boundaries of your current skill. You cannot find the right path without walking some wrong ones. You cannot know what works without discovering what doesn't. The question is not whether you will fail. You will. The question is what you will do with the information. Will you use it to build, to refine, to adjust, and to try again? Or will you use it to confirm the story that you were never really capable in the first place? The choice is yours. It has always been yours. Make it consciously. Lesson 11. Clarity of purpose is the antidote to distraction and drift. There is a particular kind of suffering that does not announce itself dramatically. It does not arrive like grief or failure, sudden and unmistakable. It creeps. It accumulates. It is the suffering of a person who is moving but has no clear sense of where they are going, who is busy but cannot say what the busyness serves, who is spending their time but cannot account for where it went or what it built. This is the suffering of a life without clear purpose, and it is far more common than any other form of human misery. Purpose is not the same as goals. Goals are specific, measurable, time-bound outcomes. Purpose is the deeper why, the reason the goals matter, the organizing principle that gives your efforts meaning, the answer to the question, in the light of everything I know and value and care about, what is my life for? Viktor Frankl, whose insights we have already encountered, built his entire therapeutic system on the discovery that the human being's primary drive is not pleasure, as Freud suggested, or power, as Adler claimed, but meaning. The will to meaning, the need to understand that one's life matters, that it is oriented towards something, that it is not merely a series of random events, but a story with a direction and a purpose. Frankl observed this with clinical precision in the camps. The prisoners who survived, physically and psychologically, were not necessarily the strongest or the most resourceful. They were the ones who had found a reason to survive. A child they intended to return to, a book they intended to finish writing, a testimony they intended to give to the world. Purpose was not a luxury in the camps.
It was a matter of life and death. In the considerably less extreme circumstances of contemporary life, the absence of purpose manifests differently, but its effects are still serious. Without a clear sense of why you are doing what you are doing, you become extraordinarily vulnerable to distraction. The notifications, the news cycles, the demands and entertainments and urgencies of other people's agendas, they all rush into the vacuum. You find yourself responsive rather than proactive, reactive rather than directed. Days pass, then weeks, then years, and the life you intended to build remains unbuilt. Not because you lacked the capacity, but because you never clearly defined what you were building toward. The antidote is clarity. Not the false clarity of a motivational poster, but the earned, examined, tested clarity that comes from doing the difficult inner work of asking the most important questions. What matters most to me? What would I regret not having done or become? What do I want to be true about how I lived? What contribution do I want to have made? These questions resist quick answers. Good. Resist the temptation to answer them quickly, because the quick answer is usually the answer you think you should give, rather than the answer that is actually true. Sit with the questions, return to them. Let them work on you in the background of your daily life until the answers that surface feel not just intellectually interesting, but viscerally resonant, felt in the body, not just understood in the mind. When you have clarity of purpose, something extraordinary happens to the problem of distraction. The things that compete for your attention do not disappear, but they lose their power over you. Because you now have a reference point, a clear picture of what matters, against which every demand on your time and energy can be measured. This is worth my attention. This is not. This serves my purpose. This pulls me away from it. The clarity makes the choices cleaner. Purpose also provides the psychological fuel required for sustained effort. Research on motivation consistently shows that people who can connect their daily activities to a larger, meaningful context, who understand why the small, unglamorous, sometimes tedious work matters, demonstrate significantly higher levels of persistence, resilience, and satisfaction than those who cannot make that connection. The work does not have to be inherently thrilling, it has to feel significant. Find your purpose. Not once and finally, but continuously, revisiting and refining your understanding of it as you grow and change. Purpose is not a destination, it is a compass, and a compass is only useful to the person who is actually using it. Lesson 12. The words you speak and think construct the reality you inhabit. Language is not merely a tool for describing reality. It is one of the primary mechanisms through which reality is constructed. This is not mysticism. It is cognitive science, supported by decades of research in psychology, linguistics, and neuroscience. The words you use, in speaking to others, and especially in speaking to yourself, shape your perceptions, influence your emotions, constrain or expand your sense of possibility, and directly influence the neural architecture of your brain. You are, quite literally, building your mind with your words. Consider the difference between these two statements, spoken in response to a difficult situation. This is a disaster versus this is a challenge. The external facts described might be identical, but the words activate entirely different neural networks, trigger entirely different emotional responses, and point the mind in entirely different directions. Disaster activates threat response systems, narrows thinking, increases cortisol, and orients the mind toward damage and loss. Challenge activates problem-solving networks, expands thinking, mobilizes resources, and orients the mind toward response and solution. Same situation, radically different cognitive and emotional outcomes. The only variable is the word. The psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett,
who has spent her career studying how emotions are constructed in the brain, argues that emotional granularity, the size of your emotional vocabulary, and the precision with which you label your inner states, directly influences your emotional regulation and psychological well-being. People with rich emotional vocabularies who can distinguish between feeling anxious and feeling uncertain, between feeling sad and feeling disappointed, between feeling overwhelmed and feeling overstimulated, have more nuanced awareness of their inner states and greater ability to respond to them effectively. People with impoverished emotional vocabularies tend to experience their emotions in cruder, more intense, more difficult to manage ways. Words give the mind handles. Without precise language for your experience, you are grasping at something you cannot quite hold. With precise language, you can identify, examine, and navigate your inner life with far greater skill. The internal monologue is where this matters most. Every human being maintains an ongoing conversation with themselves, a stream of commentary, evaluation, memory, and anticipation that runs almost constantly in the background of conscious experience. For most people, this internal voice is not kind. It is critical, often harshly so. It replays mistakes and amplifies flaws. It makes pronouncements about your worth, your capability, your attractiveness, your prospects that you would never permit a friend to make and would be appalled to hear from an enemy. And yet, you permit it from yourself. More than that, you often believe it because it speaks in your own voice and therefore carries the authority of seeming like your own observation about objective truth. It is not objective truth. It is a habit of language, shaped by your early experiences, your cultural context, and the neural pathways that have been strengthened by repetition.
And like all habits, it can be changed. Not easily, and not quickly, but deliberately, with sustained attention and effort. Begin by noticing. For one day, pay close attention to the language you use in your internal monologue. Not to judge it, but to witness it. Note the frequency and severity of self-critical language. Note the words you habitually reach for when describing difficult situations. Note whether your internal vocabulary is predominantly one of possibility or limitation, of growth or fixed judgment. Then begin to intervene, not with toxic positivity, replacing "I am terrible at this" with "I am wonderful at this" when the evidence does not support it. That kind of forced positive language is psychologically counterproductive because it conflicts with your actual experience and your brain knows it. Instead, replace absolute, identity-level, fixed-trait language with process-oriented, conditional, learnable skill language. "I am terrible at this" becomes "I haven't learned how to do this yet." "I always fail" becomes "I have not yet found the approach that works." "I'm not the kind of person who does X" becomes "I haven't done X before, and that can change." These are not trivial semantic adjustments. They are the rewriting of the operating instructions of your mind. Do them consistently, and over time, you will find that the reality you inhabit, the inner reality, which is the one that matters most, has genuinely and substantially changed. Your words are the architects of your world. Speak your world into the shape you want it to take. Lesson 13. Forgiveness is the gift you give yourself. There is a common misunderstanding about forgiveness that causes enormous harm and prevents countless people from accessing one of the most powerful psychological tools available to them. The misunderstanding is this: that forgiveness is something you do for the person who wronged you. It is not. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself. When you carry unforgiveness, when you hold on to resentment, bitterness, and the memory of injury as though it were a weapon you might yet use, you are not protecting yourself from the person who hurt you. They have moved on. They are living their life, possibly without a single moment of thought for the harm they caused. You are the one who is harmed, daily, by the carrying of what happened. The unforgiveness lives in you, not in them, and it costs you energy, attention, creativity, peace, and presence that could be directed toward the life you actually want to be living. The research on the effects of unforgiveness is stark. Chronic resentment and bitterness are associated with elevated blood pressure, weakened immune function, higher rates of depression and anxiety, disrupted sleep, and reduced life expectancy. The body does not differentiate between a physical threat and an emotional one. When you ruminate on an injury, replaying it, rehearsing what you should have said, reliving the anger, your body responds as though the threat is current and present. The stress hormones flow, the inflammatory responses activate, the damage accumulates, and the person who harmed you is nowhere in the vicinity. Forgiveness interrupts this process. It does not require that you pretend the harm did not occur. It does not require that you invite the person back into your life or expose yourself to further harm. It does not require that you endorse what was done to you or decide that it was acceptable. It requires only that you make the decision to stop carrying the injury as your primary orientation toward this person, this experience, and this chapter of your life. The psychologist Robert Enright, who has spent more than 30 years researching forgiveness, defines it as a willingness to abandon your right to resentment, negative judgment, and indifferent behavior toward one who unjustly injured you, while fostering the undeserved qualities of compassion, generosity, and even love toward him or her. This is a high bar. It is also, for those who achieve it, enormously liberating. Forgiveness begins not with the person who harmed you, but with yourself. It begins with the recognition that your pain is real and deserved to be taken seriously. That what was done to you was genuinely wrong. That the anger, grief, and sense of violation are legitimate responses to a real injury. You do not skip these feelings on the way to forgiveness. You go through them, you honor them, and then, when you are ready, not on anyone else's timeline but your own, you make the choice to set down what you have been carrying. The self-forgiveness dimension is equally important and often more difficult. The people who are harshest in their judgments of others are frequently those who are least able to forgive themselves. The contempt that appears directed outward is often, at its root, a projection of the contempt they hold for their own failures, mistakes, and limitations. Learning to extend to yourself the same compassion you might offer a friend who had made the same error is not weakness. It is the foundation of psychological health. You have made mistakes. You will make more. This is not a moral indictment. It is the nature of being a human being attempting to navigate a complex world with imperfect information and finite wisdom. The purpose of acknowledging your mistakes is not to punish yourself, but to learn from them and do better. Self-flagellation is not the same as accountability, and the person who is consumed with guilt and shame is too preoccupied with the past to be genuinely present to the future. Forgive others. Forgive yourself. Not because the harm did not matter, but because your freedom matters more than the bitter comfort of holding on. Lesson 14. Time is the only truly non-renewable resource. Money lost can be earned. Health, to a significant degree, can be restored. Relationships, with effort, can be repaired. Knowledge can be acquired at any age. Skills can be developed in any season of life. Time cannot be recovered. The hour you spent yesterday is gone absolutely. The decade you passed through in a fog of distraction or comfort-seeking or fear-driven avoidance does not come back. The conversations you did not have, the risks you did not take, the experiences you postponed for a more convenient season, these are not debts that can be repaid. They are simply absences. The Roman philosopher Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius in a series of letters that remain among the most vital texts in the literature of the examined life, opened with a statement that should land like a stone. "Continue to act thus, my dear Lucilius. Set yourself free for your own sake. Gather and save the time which till lately has been forced from you, or filched away, or has merely slipped from your hands. Make yourself believe the truth of my words, that certain moments are torn from us, that some are gently removed, and that others glide beyond our reach. The most disgraceful kind of loss, however, is that due to carelessness. That which is lost due to carelessness. Not loss through genuine misfortune, not loss through unavoidable circumstances, loss because you were not paying attention, because you were scrolling when you could have been creating, because you were complaining when you could have been building, because you were waiting for the perfect moment when the imperfect moment, right here and right now, was the only moment that was ever going to be available. The average human life, lived to its full statistical length, contains approximately 4,000 weeks. If you are 30 years old, roughly 1,560 of those weeks are already spent. They are not coming back, and the ones that remain will pass with precisely the same speed and indifference as all the previous ones. This is not intended to generate anxiety. Anxiety about time is just another way of wasting it. It is intended to generate clarity, the clarity that comes from genuinely accepting that your time here is limited, that the limits are real, that there is no extra allocation coming for good behavior or good intentions, and that what you do with the time you have is the only question of any real importance. The philosopher and essayist Oliver Burkeman, in his book on time and mortality, makes a point that is both unsettling and liberating. The feeling that you have more time than you actually do is not an accident. It is a psychologically necessary illusion that most of us maintain in order to function without being paralyzed by existential dread. But the cost of maintaining the illusion is the chronic postponement of the things that matter most. The book you will write someday, the conversation you will have when the timing is better, the life you will begin living once the current obligations are discharged. Someday is not a day of the week. The timing is never better. The obligations never fully discharge. The person who is waiting for conditions to be right before they begin to truly live is, functionally, never going to begin. Here is the practice that changes this. Treat your time with the same intentionality you would bring to any scarce resource. Not every hour needs to be optimized. Rest, play, and leisure are not waste. They are legitimate and necessary uses of time. But spend consciously. Know where your time is going. Make the choices deliberately rather than by default. When you are about to spend an hour on something, ask yourself, of all the things I could be doing with this hour, is this the one that I will be most glad to have chosen? You will not always choose wisely. No one does. But the practice of asking the question, of bringing consciousness to the spending of your irreplaceable time, will, over months and years, shift your life in ways that accumulate into something extraordinary. Time is the currency of your one life. Spend it like it matters, because it does. Lesson 15. Integrity is the architecture of a life worth living. There is a version of success that is visible and celebrated and ultimately hollow. It is the success of a person who has achieved the external markers, the money, the status, the recognition, the influence, while having, somewhere along the way, surrendered the internal alignment between who they present themselves to be and who they actually are. This misalignment has a name. It is the opposite of integrity, and it is far more common and far more costly than the culture of achievement typically acknowledges. Integrity comes from the Latin word integer, meaning whole, intact, undivided. A person of integrity is one in whom the public self and the private self are not two different people, who behaves the same way when observed as when unobserved, who says what they mean and means what they say, who makes commitments and keeps them, not because they are being held accountable from outside, but because their word to themselves has weight, who makes decisions based on their genuine values rather than on what will be most advantageous, most comfortable, or most likely to earn approval. This kind of integrity is rare, not because people are fundamentally dishonest, but because the pressures that erode it are relentless and subtle. The small compromise that seems harmless in isolation, the half-truth that is technically accurate but functionally misleading, the commitment made casually and broken conveniently, the behavior that differs based on who is in the room. Each of these micro-compromises is easy to rationalize and easy to minimize, and each of them, accumulated over time, produces a person whose inner life is characterized by a persistent, low-level unease, the unease of someone who knows, somewhere below the level of articulation, that they are not entirely real. This unease has consequences. Research in psychology consistently demonstrates that people who act in ways incongruent with their stated values experience elevated levels of anxiety, reduced self-esteem, and impaired psychological well-being. The mind knows when you are lying to it, and it responds to that lie with a kind of chronic discomfort that no external achievement can fully dissolve. The person of integrity, by contrast, has access to a form of confidence that is not dependent on circumstances. Because their confidence is rooted not in what other people think of them, not in how their current situation is going, but in the knowledge that they are living in alignment with what they genuinely believe. This is not arrogance. It is the quiet, stable self-respect that comes from knowing you can trust yourself, that when you make a commitment, you keep it, when you claim a value, you live it, when you face a choice between what is right and what is expedient, you choose right. Integrity is built the same way all character is built, slowly, through repeated small choices, most of which no one will ever see or reward. When you do the right thing and no one is watching, when you keep the commitment that no one would hold you to, when you are honest about something that it would be easier and more comfortable to lie about, these are the moments that construct the foundation of who you actually are, as opposed to who you perform being. There is also a practical dimension to integrity that deserves direct acknowledgement. The world runs on trust. Relationships are built on trust. Careers are built on trust. Organizations are built on trust. And trust is built exclusively through the consistent demonstration of integrity over time. There are no shortcuts and no substitutes. Charisma can open doors, intelligence can impress, and charm can delay judgment, but only integrity sustains. Only the person whose words reliably correspond to their actions can build the kind of deep, durable trust that is the foundation of genuine influence and lasting relationships. Live with integrity, not because it will always be rewarded, not because it will always make life easier, but because the alternative, living in the slow dissolution of your own character, is a cost no external gain is worth paying. Lesson 16. The comparison trap will steal your entire life if you let it. In the fall of 2009, a psychologist named Alex Jordan conducted a study at Stanford University that revealed something both obvious in retrospect and profoundly important in its implications. He found that people dramatically underestimated how much their peers were suffering, struggling, and feeling lonely, because peers, like most people, project confidence and competence in social settings while concealing difficulty and uncertainty. The result was that most people walked around feeling that their inner experience of struggle was anomalous, that everyone else seemed to have it more together,
that the gap between how others appeared and how they felt was evidence of some fundamental personal deficit. This was in 2009, before Instagram, before TikTok, before the entire infrastructure of curated self-presentation that has, in the years since, industrialized and amplified this particular form of psychological suffering to a degree that Jordan could not have anticipated. The comparison trap is ancient, as old as human social life, which has always involved the painful awareness of others' success against the backdrop of one's own perceived shortcomings. What technology has done is remove all the natural limits that previously contained it. In a pre-internet life, you compared yourself to the people in your immediate social environment, your neighbors, your colleagues, your classmates. Now you compare yourself to the most polished, most successful, most apparently fulfilled version of the most extraordinary people on earth, curated and filtered and strategically timed for maximum presentation impact. And you compare their highlight reel to your behind-the-scenes footage. This is not a fair contest. It was never designed to be one.
The 16th lesson is this: you must opt out of the comparison game, not because you lack competitive spirit or ambition, but because comparison, at least the involuntary, habitual, social media-fueled kind, is one of the most reliable destroyers of joy and the most insidious thief of the present moment available to modern human beings. Theodore Roosevelt famously described comparison as the thief of joy. He was correct, but it is worth understanding precisely why it thieves so effectively. When you compare yourself to another person and find yourself wanting, you experience a form of loss, the loss of a position you feel you should occupy. This triggers the same neural systems that respond to real loss and real threat. The emotional experience is genuine suffering, even though its object is entirely constructed, a story you are telling about a relationship between your real situation and an idealized, often fictional representation of someone else's. Moreover, comparison tends to generate precisely the opposite of the motivation it seems to promise. You would think that seeing someone else's success would inspire you to achieve similarly. Sometimes it does. But more often, when the comparison activates feelings of inadequacy rather than aspiration, it produces paralysis, resentment, or a kind of cynical disengagement, the defensive posture of someone who has decided that the game is rigged and that trying is not worth the risk of visible failure. The antidote to comparison is not indifference to excellence. It is the practice of competing against your former self rather than against other people. This single shift in the frame of reference changes everything. Instead of asking, "How am I doing relative to that person?" you ask, "How am I doing relative to who I was last month, last year, 5 years ago?" Instead of measuring your progress against a moving, external, largely fictional target, you measure it against the only truly fair baseline available, your own previous state. This is what genuine self-improvement looks like. Not the constant, anxious scanning of the horizon for evidence that someone else is doing better, but the focused, internally directed inquiry into whether you are growing, whether you are learning, whether you are becoming more of what you intend to be. The only race worth running is the one you are having with the person you were yesterday. This requires a degree of security that can be difficult to maintain in an environment designed to make you feel insufficient. But it can be cultivated through deliberate media choices, through the practice of gratitude for what is specifically and particularly yours, through relationships in which you are genuinely known rather than performatively presented, and through a clear enough sense of purpose that other people's trajectories become interesting rather than threatening. Your life is not a competition with anyone else's life. It is the singular, unrepeatable story of a person who was born at a specific moment in history
with a specific set of gifts, limitations, wounds, and possibilities. Tell that story well. Compare its chapters only to each other.
Lesson 17. Consistency beats intensity every single time. If you want to understand why most transformation efforts fail, most diets, most gym memberships, most creative projects, most learning initiatives, most relationship repair attempts, you do not need a complex psychological theory. You need to understand one simple dynamic: the seduction of intensity over the discipline of consistency. Intensity feels like action. When you commit to losing 30 pounds by following an extreme diet, when you sign up for a 90-day total life transformation program, when you set aside an entire weekend to finally catch up on everything you've been neglecting, you feel the surge of motivation that comes from the dramatic gesture, the fireworks of reinvention, the narrative of the before and after. This feels like momentum. It feels like it will last. And it almost never does. The problem with intensity is that it is, by definition, unsustainable. The extreme diet ends when the deprivation becomes intolerable. The 90-day transformation collapses at day 17 when life intervenes. The heroic weekend of catch-up is followed by a return to exactly the patterns that created the backlog. And the person is left not only where they started, but with an additional layer of discouragement, evidence that they can't do it, which they will use to argue against the next attempt. Consistency, by contrast, is unglamorous. It does not make for compelling before and after photography or motivating transformation stories. It is the person who reads 10 pages every day, without drama, without Instagram announcements, without a reading challenge to publicize. The person who does 30 minutes of movement every morning, not because they are training for anything in particular, but because it is simply what they do. The person who writes 500 words every day, not only when inspired, not only when the conditions are perfect, but every day, including the days when nothing feels right, and the words come slowly, and the result is mediocre. These are not exciting people from the outside. They are, however, the people who, in 5 years, have read hundreds of books, are in the best physical condition of their adult lives, and have produced a body of creative work that would have seemed impossibly ambitious to their former selves. The mathematics of consistency are extraordinary and underappreciated. If you improve by just 1% each day, 1% better habits, 1% more skilled, 1% more knowledgeable, the compound effect over 1 year produces an outcome that is 37 times better than where you started. James Clear, in his work on habit formation, calls this the aggregation of marginal gains, the idea that small, seemingly insignificant improvements, applied consistently over time, accumulate into transformation that appears sudden and dramatic from the outside, but was in fact the product of 1,000 quiet, unremarkable days. The neuroscience supports this. Habits, behavioral patterns that have become automatic, are formed through the repetition of neural firing sequences. Every time you perform a behavior, you slightly strengthen the neural pathway associated with it. The first time you do something, the pathway is faint. After 100 repetitions, it is a highway. The behavior becomes easy, then natural, then effortless. This is why a daily practice of any kind, maintained long enough, eventually stops feeling like discipline and starts feeling like identity. You are not someone who is trying to exercise, you are someone who exercises. The shift from trying to being is the shift from willpower to habit, and it happens only through the accumulation of consistent repetition. The practical implication is clear. Design your life around systems, not goals. A goal says, I want to write a book. A system says, I will write 500 words every morning before I check my phone. The goal is the destination, the system is the vehicle, and the vehicle, if it runs daily,
will reach the destination, while a goal alone without a consistent system is just a wish with a deadline. Choose the behaviors that serve who you want to become. Perform them daily, even when motivation is absent, even when the circumstances are imperfect, even when the progress seems invisible. Trust the compound, trust the consistency, and understand that the most dramatic transformations are built not from extraordinary moments, but from the quiet, determined accumulation of ordinary ones. Lesson 18. Learn to sit with uncertainty. It is the native state of an examined life. The human mind has an intense, almost desperate need for certainty. This need is so fundamental that researchers have found it operates in the brain through the same neural systems that register physical threats. Uncertainty, the state of not knowing, of lacking the information needed to predict what will happen, registers as a kind of danger.
And the response to danger is the impulse to do something, anything, to make it stop. This evolutionary design made sense. In a world of physical predators and scarce resources, the ambiguity of not knowing where the threat was coming from was genuinely dangerous, and the drive to resolve that ambiguity was adaptive. But in a complex modern world where uncertainty is not the exception but the permanent condition of an aware and thinking life, this same drive becomes a source of chronic suffering. The need for certainty drives people into terrible decisions. They rush into relationships that are not right because the ambiguity of solitude is intolerable. They stay in situations that are clearly wrong because the uncertainty of change is more frightening than the certainty of dysfunction. They adopt rigid ideological positions, not because the evidence demands them, but because the comfort of a closed mind is preferable to the discomfort of genuinely held questions. They make premature decisions, accept false reassurances, and avoid honest self-examination, all in service of the neurological need to feel like they know. The philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell wrote, in his essay on the value of philosophy, "The man who has no tincture of philosophy goes through life imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense, from the habitual beliefs of his age or his nation, and from convictions which have grown up in his mind without the cooperation or consent of his deliberate reason." The prison Russell describes is in large part a prison constructed from the flight from uncertainty. The 18th lesson is perhaps the most counterintuitive of all. Learn to be comfortable with not knowing. Learn to live in the question rather than rushing to a premature answer. Learn to tolerate the ambiguity of a life that is genuinely examined, in which comfortable certainties are regularly challenged and sometimes dissolved. This does not mean